data, a lot of guessing. You know, every day we've had to make decisions, not just for the business, but in living about what we want to choose to do with very little good data and a lot of risk taking impacting that. For example, just going to the grocery store. You go to the grocery store right now and you think, how many people right now, if I go, are going to be there? How many of them might have an infection? How many of them might be wearing a mask? How long am I going to be in the store? And how do we think the stuff is transmitted? Do I have to worry about picking up that tomato with my bare hands? How many times should I wash my hands while I'm there? Do I need my N95 mask? All of these things are a crazy number of thoughts that you need to consider today that you had never needed before when you just wanted to run out for some cream for your coffee in the morning. And because of that, we're heavily impacted by a lot of stress associated with that. And we've also then been talking about what do we do for the business, because we've never really seen this before as a downturn. So all past recessions don't look like this recession. So how do we plan for that as a business? There has just been an unending line of knowledge gaps to have us try to decide what we're doing and how to get there. So as I assembled this beautiful group of people that are speaking to you today, we're coming at it from three different directions. One is the stressful consideration of making all of these decisions. And Stephen Howard is going to speak to us first on that. And then some thoughts about how and one does processing and thinks about good decision making. And Ralph will talk to us about that. And then we roll up at the end with Liam, kind of disconnecting ourselves from actual data and thinking about future visions and how we might use scenario planning to solve the same problem. You know, decision making and problem solving are go hand in hand. And as marketers, that's what we're all about. We're trying to understand things, figure out where to go, solve problems for our customers that might make us money. But this decision making and problem solving are linked to each other. And as good primates, we love a good problem, right? So the mammals and primates have figured out how to solve problems over time, and we have evolved over millions of years to be able to solve problems. I've watched us in the last 6 months having totally new invention ways of solving problems that we have, including what we're sitting here doing today. So, you know, the banana for the primate is, you know, got to take the skin off and got to be able to get to the meat inside. And that part of understanding how things go together and what you need are being driven by the food, which is I got to get a good problem solved. So anyway, I want to applaud everyone at the moment for just having gotten this far this year, knowing that in March we kept thinking it'll be a month, and well, it'll be 6 weeks, and maybe by June, and now it's barely October almost, and we're looking at more. So patience has been a virtue for all of you, but I think we really need to figure out how to get our minds around this, because we're not going to evolve fast enough for the changes that we're seeing. Our physical brains aren't, so we're going to have to get our cognitive brains in gear to do this. So that's how we got here. I want to go back to a couple of things before I go to the agenda. This is our it's been a long time since I've even looked at Dilbert. Dilbert is no longer funny for me, but there's an old Dilbert cartoon. Oh, thank you, Ralph, for joining us, right? So this is Ralph's cartoon where, you know, if you're an engineer, as many of us were, and you're moved into marketing, there's this thing that Dilbert says, you know, there's a 2-drink minimum, but in actuality, when you're in IBSBM, there's a 3-friend minimum. I'm still about drinks, Ralph. And as I mentioned earlier before the start of this, but if you've joined me just on time, one of the things we learned from our membership as we did a virtual event 2 years ago for a member meeting was that people love the networking. We really value the ability to talk to our friends and meet new peers and learn from each other, and sometimes just commiserate. And unfortunately, we can't do it this time, but we had a nice visit with each other in February. And this time we're going to try again, but using GatherTown. So I appreciate your willingness to be experimentalist and to learn something new yet again in this time of COVID. And that'll be coming up at the breaks and at the end. Thank you, Ralph. So you're going to go to GatherTown, and this is our grand attempt. There is a link that's in your inbox that looks something like that. And if you click on it, it will allow you to get connected. It came in an email from Lori Nicolini, and there's a title in it, so you ought to be able to search it. If when you register, it would be helpful to just put your first and last name in along with like a dash and your affiliation. That would be grand, because that way we'll be able to see who you are in the participant list, and people can see you and find you and talk to you. It's going to be open during the entire meeting. I'm trusting that you're adults, and if you wanted to play video games and watch these presentations, you can. I can't stop you anyway, so I might as well have GatherTown open as well. So it's over there. And then here's our agenda for today. So my opening comments are just about done. I'm going to turn it over in a second to Stephen Howard. I'll introduce him in a second. At the break, after an hour, we'll have about 20 minutes or so to explore GatherTown. The Zoom window will also be open. So if you just want to chat and Zoom with each other, we'll let you talk there. I do ask, though, that during the presentations, everybody else keep their mics and their videos off, just so keep the bandwidth down and the sound down. At 1 o'clock, we'll have Ralph Keeney, and then we'll have another break after that hour. And then Liam Fahey will do the third talk, and we'll go to an open panel. So all of our speakers will be available at 3:30 to take open questions in panel format. Then we'll close whenever that is, and we'll all move to happy hour in GatherTown, where hopefully we'll all have figured it out by then and be enjoying it. So again, I would appreciate if you would keep your mics off and your video off during the presentations. During the breaks, feel free to connect with each other either on Zoom or in GatherTown. So just a few notes. I know many of you have been using Zoom for a very long time now, but down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see some controls, right? So again, keep your video off, your microphone muted. If you want to raise your hand, Lori and I will be watching the participant screen, so we'll be able to see if you've got a question. But the best thing you can do is simply type your question in the chat box. So click in chat, type your question in either to all or to Lori or to Lynn, preferably to Lynn. And if it's appropriate, I will actually interrupt the speaker and ask the question. And if I know he's going to probably cover it, I'll let it go, or I'll save it for the end. But just as you think of a question, go ahead, type it in. We'll make sure that we get to it before the end of the session. Okay. If you need something during this and nobody's answering the chat box, I don't know why, but you could try that. You can also call or text. So we have a third device sitting with us, and that is my phone number, 919-414-5592, or you can call or text Lori. Lori stays off of the video and the audio, but she can take a call if she needs to talk you through anything that's a challenge with technology. All right, that's all I have. So let me stop sharing here, and Steve, if you'll put yours up, I'm gonna stop sharing. That's what I said what I was gonna do right there, and I'll let you put yours up while I introduce you. All right, Stephen? Okay.
I got it.
All right. So I really am delighted to be able to introduce you all to Stephen Howard. We thought a lot about this particular topic area, and several folks had recommended that we look at what Stephen has been doing, talking about how your brain impacts your decision making, and it just felt like something we really ought to cover with our folks. He's an author of 20 books. He has 40 years of experience in sales and marketing. He was at a variety of companies or worked with them, including Texas Instruments, Time Magazine, BBDO Advertising. He was the VP of Marketing for Citibank's Consumer Banking Group. So he comes to us as a fellow of what we do. He's one of our peers. He specializes in creating and delivering this leadership development program for frontline leaders and supervisors. And he's trained over 25 years, 10,000 leaders in Asia, Australia, Africa, Europe, and North America. His latest book is How Stress and Anxiety Impact Your Decision Making. It's on Amazon. Feel free to pick it up. And I won't go into any more detail except that, as he was talking to me about this, I already learned some things that I need to do. So I'm hoping that this is helpful as a foundational presentation to you all. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you now, and I'm going to go on mute.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lynn. Good morning to everybody. It's still morning on the East Coast. I'm coming to you from the West Coast. So hope it's a wonderful session today. I'm looking forward to it, as I'm sure you are. And as Lynn said, we're going to talk about how the brain operates, how the brain functions when we're making decisions, and what is the emotional aspect of our decision making. So really want to talk about how do you manage your brain. So it's all good to know what this is about, but how do you do it? How do you manage it? What can you do to control your emotions, to control emotional hijacking so that you are in a position to make more rational decisions? So as Lynn said, I've written 21 books. The last 2 books have been around this topic. The most recent book is really not for leaders. It's for everybody, whether you're a housewife or an engineer or anybody in the world right now, because it talks about how stress and anxiety impacts your decision making. So it kind of takes the topic, what we're going to talk about, and makes it really for the general public. In addition to what Lynn said, I'm also, I do one-to-one coaching, and I'm a certified health coach as well. What I'm going to share with you today is basically the foundation of the research I did for a book that came out just under 2 years ago called Better Decisions, Better Thinking, Better Outcomes. And it talks about how to go from mindful, as 2 words, how to go from mindful to mindful leadership. In other words, how to become more present. And it's really good to talk about this because I'm going to talk to you about the emotional side of decision making. And then after our break, our next speaker is really going to talk about the rational side. And so what I want to encourage you is to think about what this presentation is about the emotional side, and how to pause. And that's why this book title is the way it is. People often say to me, shouldn't it be better thinking first? Isn't it better thinking, then you get better decisions, and then you'll get better outcomes? And the whole premise of the book and what I'm going to share with you today is no, you actually, the first step you have to make is to become more rational. The first step you have to make, the first decision you have to make is not allow yourself to get emotional hijacked, to get your emotions under control, to get the rational part of your brain in control of your emotional part of your brain. Then you'll do better thinking, and then you'll get better outcomes. So this is the order of it, and this is why what you'll see from me this morning will kind of lead into our next 2 presenters throughout the course of the day. So first of all, decision making is a skill, and the beauty of that is it means that as any skill, you can enhance it, you can practice it, you can develop it, and you can get better at it. Unfortunately, it's not a skill that is usually taught. Sometimes you get taught at very high levels how to make like strategic decisions, how to weigh options or whatever, but even down, you know, day-to-day type stuff. What, you know, you go back to what Laurie was talking about, you know, decision making right now about grocery shopping. Does anybody really teach you how to weigh these options? No, and that's what I hope myself and my 2 fellow presenters today can give you some insights into, and to help you build your skills of decision making. Because quite frankly, we all make right decisions and we all make wrong decisions, and we make right decisions in the workplace and we make wrong decisions in the workplace too. In fact, just thinking back over the years, you know, that the decision to launch the spacecraft Challenger was a terrible decision. In retrospect, but even at the time, if people understood, there's some great research that went into that post-launch, into how that decision was made and the pressure that people were under and the biases that people had in making that decision. The Central Intelligence Agency, you know, pre-9/11, they pretty much looked at the terrorists in Afghanistan sitting in their caves as unsophisticated, you know, lack of technology, you know, not really a serious threat, particularly in the homeland. And then look what happened to us 10 years ago. And the CIA they failed to understand the significance to the Muslim community about being in a cave, about not using technology, about relying on the old traditional ways of communicating. So strategic thinking gone wrong. Many of you probably know this. Blockbuster had an opportunity to buy Netflix many years ago. Those of you who are my age and Ralph's age know that Blockbuster used to be on almost every corner, it seemed like. And now Blockbuster side, now Netflix's business model of sending videos in red envelopes to the mail, and you could queue up 10 or 12 of your choices, but you didn't know what was going to come in the mail. Whatever was available, they'd send to you. Blockbuster said that model will never work. People want to go to the corner store. They want to look at what's available. They want to pick the movies out there. They want to buy some popcorn and candy and take it home and enjoy their evening. Well, Blockbuster today, my understanding is there's one Blockbuster outlet left in the United States, and I believe it's somewhere in country Oregon, on the countryside of Oregon. And Netflix today is worth several $billion on the stock market of capital. So bad decision by the board of Blockbuster. Kodak at one time, believe it or not, used to be a leader in digital photography. But in the early days of digital photography, but they realized at that time that they were making most of their profits, not by selling film, but actually by selling the chemicals and the paper to the people who processed the film and who printed the photos for you. And they said, well, yeah, people always want to carry photos around. They're going to want to, you know, have albums and share albums with their family members and their friends, take photo albums to work. And of course, people like Steve Jobs and others came along and said, you know what, people don't want to carry pictures with them. Matter of fact, people don't even want digital cameras. What they really want is take photos on their phone. And so, you know, Kodak just lost out on that decision. And we all know the story of New Coke. I mean, what a disaster that was, to create a product that tasted like your competitor, when most of us who drank Coke drank it because it didn't taste like Pepsi. And I was one of those Coke fans, Coke fanboys, so to speak. I would, drink 5 or 6 cans of Coke a day. And when New Coke came out, I was terrified. I was living in Singapore at the time. I literally went and bought like 4 cases of Coke to stock up on it before the New Coke arrived in Singapore, because I didn't want something that tasted like Pepsi. And, we all have different tastes, different preferences. People enjoy Pepsi. I don't. I enjoy Coke. Well, New Coke was a disaster. So, we have all these really smart people get into a room and make business decisions, and yet sometimes they go wrong. And some of the reasons these decisions go wrong is we're all under press. We're under stress. We're under the 24 hours. We're trying to react. We're trying to make quick decisions. We're buried in paper, despite supposedly the digital world. We're going to go to a paperless business environment. We really never have. And so we can't cope. Our brain gets overloaded. And when our brain gets overloaded, as you'll see in a few moments here, the brain limits our options and it leads us to make less than optimal decisions. And why are our brains so busy? Well, we make something like 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And as adults, we make something like 45,000 remotely conscious decisions a day. Now that could be remotely conscious, could be as, which shoe do you put on first before you go out? Do you put your left shoe on first or your right shoe? Let's say you put on your right shoe and you're going to wear sneakers that need to be tied. You put on your left shoe. Now you put on your right shoe. Now, which one do you tie first? Because you're near your right foot. Do you tie your right laces first? And then go to your left, or do you go back to the left shoe because you put it on first? Or do you put your left shoe on and tie it first and then put your right shoe on? These are remotely conscious decisions, but they're being made by our brain. Our brain is operating even though we're not aware of it. Our brains processes something like 400 bits of information per second, including these little decisions about how to put our shoes on and which laces to tie first. But we're only aware about 2,000 of these. And that's why, when we're putting our shoes on, we are often thinking about something else and we're doing something else. Interestingly, the average person checks their mobile devices 100 times a day. Now, I hope you guys will bring this under average today. I hope you're all going to be present and focused for all 3 presenters and come up with some really good questions for us. But just think about that. If we're awake, 16 hours a day, that means we're basically checking our phones roughly 6 times an hour or every 10 minutes. That's just phenomenal that we can't get away from our mobile devices. And as a result, there's an urban acronym called FOMO, the fear of missing out. But I would really suggest to you that we all change that acronym means, and it should now mean the fear of mind overload. Because that's what we're doing to our minds. That's what we're doing to our brains. We are overloading them. And when we overload our brains, the emotional part of our brains takes over rather than the rational part of our brain. So we talked about decision making as a skill. But despite it being a skill, a study at University of Oxford revealed something I found very fascinating when I was doing the research for my book. And it was that the time it takes for the brain to create an answer to a problem, it correlates with what the brain perceives as the difficulty of that decision based on the initial information available to it. And this is why we all get into situations where we chastise ourselves. We stop and tell us, why is it so difficult to make this decision? Why am I struggling with this? This should be an easy decision. Well, if you step back in the process, when you first heard about that problem, that situation, whatever it need that your brain need, or even opportunity that you want your brain to work on, at that time, if the brain had insufficient information being received and it told itself physically, logically, that this is going to be a tough decision, no matter what new information you get during the process of the decision-making process, the brain locks itself into saying, this is going to be a hard decision. This is going to be difficult. And this is one reason you want your brain to be open to get all the relevant information at the time you first hear about a problem or first hear about a situation. Because if you're only getting limited information, if you're not fully mentally present when the situation arises, then the brain is going to think, oh, this is hard. This is going to be difficult. And that makes the decision-making process more difficult. Additionally, what neuroscientists call pattern recognition, our brains try to reflexively counter decision-making anxieties by narrowing and simplifying our options. The brain, to protect itself, tries not to get overloaded, tries not to work too hard. And so particularly when it's tired, when it's stressed, you're fatigued, you're jet lagged, if you're traveling, the brain tries to look for simple solutions, simple. And what it does is it looks for patterns and says, well, you know what? Something similar happened months ago or years ago, and I did this to solve it. This looks similar enough, I'll make that same decision. But as we all know, particularly what we're going through right now, today's world is nothing like what 2 months ago or 6 months ago, much less 2 years ago is all about. But the brain is recognizing, looking for patterns. It wants quick answers. We also have what in our memories, what the scientists call emotional tagging. And this signals us as to whether or not to pay attention to something or even to someone. And that filters our information and data. And it leads us into, and we won't get into too much of it, but unconscious bias. If you don't like somebody, particularly in the work environment, if you have a disagreement or a personal difficulty that interacting with somebody else, and you're in a meeting and that person suggests something, you dismiss it or you downplay it. You think it's not significant. And that person might have the key to the solution, the key to get you on the path to the solution. But because we're emotionally tagging their idea with our perception of that person, our dislike for that person, or the difficulty that we're going through with that person at the time, we will not pay attention or we'll dismiss their ideas. And this happens in our personal lives as well. So be very cognizant of that. Be very careful about that. If you dismiss somebody's idea, is it because it's a bad idea, or is it because you're not in tune with that individual, particularly in the workplace? And this is very interesting. In our brain, there are modules that focus on gathering benefits. And there's other modules that concentrate on delivering benefits. And this creates internal conflict. So again, an analogy I'll use is think back to a year ago when we were going to shopping malls, and let's say you've been dedicated, you're going to lose weight, you're trying to get fit, and you're doing really good, you're exercising on a regular basis, so that part of your brain is congratulating you, you're trying to gather benefits of the lost weight, of being healthier. And now you're walking through the mall and you smell Cinnabon. I can just pause, kind of know what everyone's doing. You're just recognizing, you're just remembering what that smell of Cinnabon used to be wafting through the mall. And now part of your brain wants to gather those benefits, and it starts arguing with you or trying to rationalize with you and say, hey, it's only one Cinnabon. Or just eat half it, share it with somebody, or boy, it's going to taste good. You can work it off. You can walk for an extra 10 minutes tonight and walk it off. So this is where we get into these internal conflicts, because part of our brain wants to gather benefits and part of it wants to deliver the benefits, and that would be delivering the benefits of the taste, the enjoyment of eating that Cinnabon. So we have to be aware of that. And our brain is busy. We have too much information. We get information overload. We get inconsistent or conflicting information. And as a basic, our brains get fatigued. And a lot of studies have been done that shows executives, particularly, the typical 8 to 5 or 7 to 6, whatever the working hours might be. This is why more poor decisions are made in the afternoon than in the morning. Because all those decisions, conscious and unconscious decisions that we make from the time we arise in the morning, until late afternoon, particularly if we don't feed our brain well at lunch by having a healthy lunch, our brain's getting tired. And we're making quicker decisions, less than optimal decisions because our brain is tired. Or sometimes we won't make a decision at all. We'll procrastinate, we'll delay, and that is not always good either. Other factors that impact our decision making are conscious and unconscious biases, the emotional hijacking, and I'll talk more about that. And of course, the main thing I wanted to share with you today is really about stress, because we're all living in times of prolonged stress, and prolonged stress is bad for our brain. As a matter of fact, prolonged stress, and as longer these lockdowns and shelter-in-place rules happen, the more prolonged stress we're going to suffer from. And prolonged stress impacts the part of our brain that helps us to control our emotions. And this is why we are seeing already, and been seeing it actually for months, reports of binge eating, alcohol abuse, and domestic violence as these lockdowns and shelter-in-place situations continue. And that's simply because our brain, that part of our brain, is degenerating. It's not able to cope with this prolonged stress. And as a result, the emotional part of it is taking over. And as a result, we're reacting emotionally, or we're trying to satisfy our emotions by binge eating or abusing alcohol. There's also some fears we need to be aware of when we make decisions. And four that we often fall into is the fear of taking action. We all know this in the business world as paralysis by analysis, but it can happen in our personal life. I witnessed a friend of mine about 6 months ago had a very hard decision to make. And she was driving, and she had a phone call that came in, and she literally had to pull over, and she just paused, and she looked at me and says, why is this decision so difficult for me? And I said, well, stop thinking about the decision. Let's talk about the stress that you're under. Let's talk about everything that's impacting you. And you're afraid that whatever decision you make, somebody's going to be happy and somebody's going to be unhappy. And you're trying to weigh all this, and you're trying to drive at the same time. I said, let's just pull over and pause. And you just think about it, get yourself under control, get more rational. But, she was afraid of taking action. She was almost paralyzed from taking action. Fear of making a mistake. And look, we all make mistakes, but if we've been harshly criticized for that mistake, or if we're afraid that we're going to repeat a mistake, then we tend to, again, procrastinate or make smaller decisions rather than the big decisions that we might want to make. Our fear of history, our fear that where we've made good decisions or bad decisions, and we're afraid that we might, again, repeat those. And judgment. We're afraid how other people will judge us based on the decisions we make, but even more importantly, we often fear how we're going to judge ourselves. We are our harshest critic sometimes. And so we're often afraid, if I make this decision, how will I treat myself? How much will I berate myself? So a lot of fears go into the decision-making process. And then this research comes from a lady at Stanford University. She said that the biggest mistakes when facing hard decisions are we spend too much time in the research phase. We don't give ourselves enough time to learn how to make great decisions. So we don't think about our decision-making process. We just think about the decision itself. We confuse the quality of the decision with the quality of the outcome. And look, almost everyone on this call made great decisions in the fourth quarter last year, I'm sure. You're all doing marketing plans for 2020. You're making excellent decisions based on the information you had at the time. And then the world turned upside down in late January, mid-February on into March. Well, no one should be criticize themselves because they say, well, that was a stupid decision. That was a dumb plan we had in November or December or January. No, the world changed. Now that's an example that we're all can understand, but we do the same thing even when we're not in a pandemic situation. We make a decision in the business world, and then a competitor changes something. We criticize ourselves for not knowing what that competitor was going to do. No, we had unless there was a reason we didn't know, or a reason we should have known. Typically, we don't know what our competitors are going to do. So we make a quality decision. The outcomes might not be quality because something changes. Nothing wrong with our decision-making process. Mistaking our options as fixed and binary. And I'm going to go more into the binary decision-making in a moment because I really want to share that with you. That's a huge mistake, that we only have, our decisions are fixed, that we only have two choices. And we get stuck in this trap of perfectionism. And very rarely do we need to make perfect decisions. We need to make good decisions that lead us into great decisions, and that allows us to cope, um, change course if we necessary, adapt, be agile. And so this comes from, and I love her title, this professor at Stanford University. She is a decision analysis expert. And she's well worth reading and learning more about the research that she's done. So let's talk about stress. And I hope I'm not putting you under too much stress now, because there's some good news at the end of this, by the way. So don't just hang on with me. I'm going to load up a lot of negative news here. There's good news not only at the end of my presentation, but my two colleagues are going to be, they're more positive, they're more optimistic in their presentations than this one. The American Psychological Association said 50% of Americans are kept awake at night due to stress. This is pre-pandemic. This is 2018 research. So I can only guarantee you that that number has gone up in the last 6 months. And Generation X, so those of you here on the call who were born between 1965 and 1979, you've been labeled by the American Psychological Association as the most stressed generation in the United States. So congratulations, you got the honors, you win. I think you can be consoled by the fact that the millennials who came after you are probably going to pass you as the most stressed generation coming up. But you live in a life of stress. Now, many studies have shown that job stress is far and away the major source of stress for American adults, and it's escalated precariously over the last few decades. And this comes from the American Institute of Stress. And sometimes I chuckle at myself when I see this slide, because I think we have to have an Institute of Stress. Well, we probably do. We probably need somebody out there studying this, because we do live very stressful lives. If you go back about 20 years ago, job stress was typically third or fourth in the survey results. Number 1 and 2, and it kind of bounced back and forth over the years, was either your personal relationships, particularly family relationships, either with your spouse, with your children, your in-laws, or even your own parents, if you're an adult with your own parents, or financial concerns. So it went back and forth between those two for most, but now by far and away, it's now job stress is the major source for us. And again, it's only gotten worse in the pandemic times. Now, here's why this is important. Stress directly impacts our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain at the front. That's the rational control center. This is where our rational thinking takes place. And thus it impacts the amount of quality of information that reaches the prefrontal cortex. So again, as I said earlier, so can you imagine that if we're under stress and stress is impacting the amount of information that the prefrontal cortex is receiving, again, it starts to lock the brain into that this is going to be a hard decision, or this is going to be difficult, or I don't want to make that decision. I want someone else to make this. And we get locked into that mode because we're not getting quality of information up front. The brain is wired to be reactionary under stress. And this leads to binary choice decision making. So binary choice decision making is when we think of yes or no, one or two, black or white, this or that. So let me give you a quick story to illustrate this for you. I was teaching in a classroom in Fort Worth last December, and normally this is a 4-day program, and normally it's limited to 24 people because it's highly participatory, highly interactive. But it was the end of the year, the client wanted to put a few more people, so I agreed to allow 28 people to sign up for it. And I could handle that. That wasn't a problem. When I showed up on Monday morning, was getting organized, and we got ready to start the class, I had 38 participants, and they all were convinced that they had signed up for the program. So we started the class, 38 people. At coffee break, I called the client who's in Houston and said, this is the situation. I left a voice message. I got 38 people. What do you want me to do? And she called me back at lunchtime, and she was under a lot of stress. Again, end of the year, thinking about next year's financial budgets, planning, all kinds of pre-Christmas meetings, everything that we all go through pre-Christmas. And she was fluttered. She goes, just kick them out. Just get rid of them. Everyone who was not on my official list, something's gone wrong, just send them home. And I can't afford that. I can't afford to keep them in the class, and they shouldn't be there. So yes or no, either keep them or kick them out. Just real quick. She was in a binary decision mode. Not looking at everything, I said, okay, wait a second, time out. Of these 10 people that weren't on your list, 2 had flown in from Colorado to Fort Worth, 1 had flown in from Baton Rouge, 1 had flown up from Houston, 2 had driven in from Oklahoma, and one had driven down from Kansas. Do you really want to send them home? They have hotel reservations for the week. Some of them have flights. They've all got your work colleagues and their home life organized to be here for 4 days. Do you really want to throw them out? And what's going to be the impact on them in the eyes of their colleagues if they have to get kicked out of this class? I said, if you'll give me permission to change the class a little bit, I've thought of some options. I can still run this program. I have to make some changes, but I can still run it with 38 people. And so she agreed. So I was in a more calm, less stressful state. She was in a binary decision-making mode. I convinced her, let them stay. And fortunately for them, in retrospect, if you think about it, those extra 10 people, there's no classroom training in 2020. And that company has already announced there will be no classroom training in the first 6 months of 2021. So those 10 people at the earliest would be trained in the second half of next year and probably in the first part of 2022. So can you imagine what the benefit to that company that we left them in the program? So that's the difference between making a more mindful, purposeful decision and making a stressful binary decision. A prolonged stress also causes, as I mentioned, the degeneration of the area of the brain responsible for self-control. I just mentioned that, which leads us to our binge eating and our alcohol abuse and our domestic abuse. And overwhelming stress causes the brain to shift into survival mode. And this leads us to behaviors, to actions, and even verbal outbursts, which really don't fit the circumstance and don't alleviate the situation. In fact, they make it worse. And this makes it worse not only for that person who has the outburst, but it makes it worse for everyone involved. And again, this is what we call emotional hijackings, which I think Daniel Goleman was the first to label it as emotional hijacking. Interestingly, again, from the research, feeling stress changes how we weigh risks and rewards during the decision-making process. Now, when I first read this study, I thought, sure, when we're under stress, we're going to be negative, right? When we're not under stress, we're going to be optimistic. But interestingly, it was the opposite. Under stress, people have a natural tendency to pay more attention to positive information and to focus on the way outcomes could go right, not on the negative. So they get more positive, and they're not weighing, they're not looking. This is why I think so many of these decisions like New Coke, Kodak, the decision not to buy Netflix. I think this is why people are looking at, well, if we don't make that, it's okay, we'll be better off. Here's all the positive things that will happen if we don't go down that road. And they don't understand what the obstacles are, what the hurdles are, what the negative impacts of the decisions could be. Again, the challenger situation is the exact same thing. The people making that decision to launch were thinking everything positive could go wrong with that launch of the challenger and not the disaster that might happen and which unfortunately actually occurred. Now, here's very interesting, and I'm going to share this, but I want to with a note of caution now. This obviously is stereotypical. It's based on research, and all of us are different individuals. So just when you see this information, doesn't mean every male reacts this way, doesn't mean every female reacts this way. But in general, based on the research, under stress, men have a tendency and willingness to take risks. While under stress, women have an increased tendency to become more conservative about risk. Now, this is very interesting because think about the dynamics of this in the workplace. If you've got a team or even just one other person, if you're one gender and the person you're trying to work with to make a decision is from the other gender, their natural tendency is you're going to have a different perspective, a different willingness, whether to take risk on this decision or not take risk. Again, the individuals could be different, but the general tendency would be that gender-wise, we look at risk differently. Again, when I talked about the binary decision-making, it's in there a couple of times. I never know where I want to tell the story about the Fort Worth training, so I've already told that story. And unfortunately, though, and this is the key aspect of this, the more stressful the circumstances, as what the lady was in Houston, the more you need to explore a wider range of options as potential solutions. And she was not in that mode herself to explore options. Fortunately, I was, and I could present those options to her and get her to pause and relax and calm down. And she made a much better, more optimal decision for her organization as a result. And this is also interesting. So those of you who are entrepreneurs or business owners or are thinking of going that direction down the road, or if you're a mid-level manager, or a new mid-level manager, I should say, Our tendency in these is to resort to micromanaging when we're under increased stress. So we want to be more in charge. We want to be hovering over people, and that doesn't help our relationships with people. It doesn't help build their confidence. But that's just a natural reaction. When we're under stress, we want more control. We want more power. We want more influence. And whereas we might be good at delegating and empowering other people in non-stressful times, our natural human tendency is to revert back to grabbing control, grabbing those reins. We don't have to, we just need to be aware of these tendencies and act appropriately in the situation. So we talked about this, people are stressed out, binary, more wired to react, and this is what happens. We have these both in the workplace and our personal lives, we blow up. We have these emotional meltdowns. So how do you manage stress? Interestingly, I don't know about you, but when I was a child, I was often told, Stephen, when you get angry, you can't hit another child. That's not right. What you need to do is count to 10. And scientists have proven now that, and it's only in the last 15 or 20 years through the MRI technology that scientists have had access to understand these dynamics, but they have now been able to prove that when you make that conscious decision, it takes the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, approximately 8 seconds to gain control over the amygdala, which is the part of your brain that is running the emotional center of your brain. And so 8 seconds is approximately counting to 10. So the same thing, just pause, collect yourself, or even better, do purposeful breathing. Purposeful breathing is just breathing from the diaphragm. And I'll give you a quick demonstration. This is a technique the Navy SEALs use. They call it box breathing. And I don't know any of us who have a more stressful work environment than Navy SEALs. And if you want to do it with me, it's you breathe in and you hold it for 6 seconds. Then you exhale and you hold the exhale for 6 seconds. You breathe in deeply through your diaphragm. You can hear it, and hold it now for 6 seconds. And then exhale and force it out. And hold that exhale for 6 seconds. And then repeat. Inhale and hold it. Exhale forcefully. And they do it for about 5 minutes. Now you can do this anywhere. I do it before I get on an airplane. You know, flying is stressful enough, and in today's world, it's even more stressful. So as I'm boarding the plane, my group is lined up to get on a plane, I'll look at the tarmac, and I use 12 seconds because I only do this for about 2 minutes. So I'll breathe in deeply, I'll hold it for 12 seconds, and I'm just looking at the planes on the tarmac, blah, 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 the people, you know, the cars running around, the luggage carts, whatever. Then I'll exhale and hold it, and I just keep looking out there, and I'll do this for about 2, maybe 2.5 minutes. It calms me down. Nobody's paying attention to me. The person in front of me, the person behind me, they don't know. They just see me looking out at the window. So it's something you can do anywhere. And in the book, there's a couple other techniques on purposeful breathing. And then your long-term brain health. The more you take care of your brain health, the better you're going to make in managing stress to make decisions. And I'm going to end the presentation in a few minutes and talk about that. But the last thing here I want to talk to you particularly about the work environment is multitasking. And here I'm really talking about cognitive multitasking. I mean, all of us can watch a movie on TV and eat popcorn or eat a dinner or something like that. Although you will notice, though, if you're focusing on your food, sometimes you miss part of the dialogue, and that's why you have to stop. Or if you're refilling your wine glass or your water bottle, whatever it is you're having with your dinner, and you're taking your eye off the screen, you don't quite hear the dialogue, and that's why you have to pause and rewind it. So cognitive multitasking is not the answer, even though we think it is, and this is particularly generation and the millennials, they tend to be high multitaskers, cognitive multitaskers, and this is not good for you. Multitasking is detrimental to your focus. So we're particularly right now, if you've been listening to me now for, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes, and you're looking at your email occasionally, or somebody comes in your room, your child comes in, asks you something, your spouse comes in, whatever might be happening to you, as you get distracted, you're missing part of this presentation. And it's detrimental to your focus. And that's why, we always tell people, put your phone away, put it in airplane mode. Your constant switching between email, phone call, and other tasks is preventing your brain from focusing and engaging in deep problem solving that you need to come up with good solutions, or to come up with creative, or to be innovative. And here's an example of this. When I write my books, I tend to write in 3 to 3.5 hour segments. But I get up every 50 minutes or so to make a new cup of coffee. I go downstairs, turn the kettle on, and I used to pick up my phone when I was making my coffee, and I'd quickly check my email and blah, blah, blah. And I noticed that after I read this research, it dawned on me that when I go back, I have a hard time getting re-engaged in my writing. So now when I write, I turn my phone on airplane mode. Those phone calls, those emails, everything else can wait 3 hours or 2 hours if I've been in the process for a while. When I go down and make my coffee, my brain is still thinking in the background. It's thinking about, how do I start the next chapter? How do I start the next paragraph? How am I going to segue from one point to the next point? And otherwise, if I look at my phone and look at emails or text messages, now my brain's going to be thinking about that. And it's not thinking about the book I'm writing. And interestingly, the inability to focus is one of the leading indicators of dementia. And yet, and this is why I say this is a societal issue, Generation X and millennials, majority of them are training their brains not to focus by multitasking, by trying to get things done. And really the brain can only think of one thing at a time. It can only hold one thought at a time. And so all you're doing multitasking is bouncing back and forth between thoughts, and you're not teaching your brain how to focus. A Stanford University study revealed that regular multitasking makes it difficult for people to focus on a single task. In fact, it talked about multitasking results in goal irrelevant information to compete with goal relevant information in the brain. And as I just said in my story about how I write, text messages, emails, all that is goal irrelevant information for the 3 hours that I'm working on my book. Goal relevant information should be anything. I should be looking at my notes, looking at articles I've downloaded or any research I've done. That's all goal relevant information. That's what I should keep my brain focused on to write my next book. The study from the Stanford University results were very, very clear. Daily multitasking, regular daily multitasking. So you do it occasionally, that's fine. But if you do this on a constant basis, you become less effective when you are multitasking. And even more amazingly, you become less effective when you're not multitasking. And over time, you become less effective at prioritizing how to achieve goals. When you multitask, you literally reduce your intelligence level. And this was done in a study in the UK on comprehension. You typically read something, answer some questions about what you read, how well you comprehended it. And the study at York University showed that multitaskers scored 11% lower on the standard comprehension test than those who are not multitasking, 11%. Multitasking diminishes mental productivity. It elevates our brain fatigue. We get tired, our brain gets tired earlier, and the fatigue lasts longer. It increases our stress. And I love this quote. And if there's one thing you take away from one of the things I hope you take away from today's presentation, multitasking is as toxic to the brain as smoking is to your lungs. And you go back 100 years ago or 90 years ago, I remember seeing it, and I wasn't alive, but I remember seeing in my advertising studies, advertising for cigarettes, or this cigarette was recommended by doctors, or doctors recommend smoking to reduce stress. Well, we know how well that worked, and obviously that had to change over time. Well, the same thing now is that we're now understanding from today's science research, and we will know more in the coming years and decades, that multitasking is as toxic to our brain as smoking is to our lungs. And this comes from Sandra Bond Chapman, who founded the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas in Dallas. So I hope you remember that. Research shows that 97.5% of us cannot multitask. They did say there's about 2.5% of so-called super taskers. And we all think we're in that 2.5%, but the chances are almost all of us today are in that 97.5%. In fact, we've got 100 people on the call today. There's only 2 or 3 of us on this call who are really good at multitasking, and the rest of us are not. So all these notifications jolt our stress hormones into action. They're training our brains to be in a nearly continuous state of stress and fear, and that's not good for our brain. And that leads me into wrapping up here over the next 10 or so minutes about long-term brain health. And first, again, I hate to give you some bad news, but there's some very startling statistics to share with you. And this is why I'm passionate about the subject. This is why I wrote the book, because I started the book after I was looking after my father, who had early Alzheimer's before he passed, and I was his primary caregiver. And I started doing research into this, how I could be a better caregiver, and this led to the book, Better Decisions, Better Thinking, Better Outcomes. And now, again, this is pre-pandemic information I'm going to share with you. So again, this is 2017, 2018, early 2019 information. At 2018, I believe this came from a 67% increase in dementia, Alzheimer's, and disease and stroke are predicted by the 2030. That means 10 million Americans and 76 million people worldwide will be suffering from dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or stroke at 2030. And treating these will be a $1 trillion industry. It's going to be huge. The American Heart Association, the American Stroke Association, in a combined research study, estimate that 60% of us in America will develop a brain disease in our lifetime. So that's 60. If we've got 100 people here on this call, that's 60 of us. 6 out of 10 of us will develop some form of brain disease in our lifetime. Now, this is twofold, partly because we are living longer and the brain does degenerate a little bit, but it's also our lifestyle is increasing this. This is 2019 information. So in 2019, 48% of adults had some type of cardiovascular disease, whether that was coronary heart disease, heart failure, high blood pressure. I'll be honest with you, the huge bulk of this, if I recall correctly, it was like 65 or 70% of this was high blood pressure. But again, that's a leading indicator for other, coronary heart disease and heart failure. But that's 122 million adults with some form of cardiovascular disease. Why is this important? Because the brain is the biggest user of blood and oxygen in our bodies. So anything that's impacting our heart, impacting our ability to pump blood, particularly pump blood into our brains, is going to lead to increased risk for dementia, Alzheimer's, or stroke. And we lost nearly 1 million people in 2019 from cardiovascular disease. And this is the reason I'm passionate about this, folks. And I hope this resonates with you in your personal life. Is 10% of adults 60 to 99 right now are parental caregivers. In other words, looking after their own aged parents, as are 12% of adults who are 70 plus. Let me tell you something. Looking after an elderly parent who is suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that, it is financially devastating. It is emotionally devastating. It is really sad to see your parent and just to see that their mental capacity start to degenerate and their inability to remember things, their inability to do basic functions or simple functions that they did for you when you were a child. And so this is only going to get worse. And so, those of you who are, in your 40s or 50s, as your parents live longer, chances are you're going to be being a parental caregiver for your parent or anybody else's parent. And if you have to get in a situation, it is going to be financially and emotionally challenging for you. So excuse my passion there, but this is why I really want to drive this message home to you. Your brain is the most metabolically active organ in the body, as it takes 10 times the fuel of any other part of your body. In fact, one of the things when I coach people these days, I tell them, particularly about their dietary habits, you should think about feeding your brain, not feeding your stomach. Think about eating what's good for your brain, not just how to fill up your stomach and get rid of those hunger pains. Your brain also changes more than any other part of the body. And this is one of the things that surprised me in the research I did. Because when I was a student in high school, and by the way, I'm not a scientist, as Lynn said, I have a marketing background. I've got 2 BA degrees. My last science class, I think, was high school biology. Science was not the direction I was going to go into. So I'm just coming sharing with you information that I read that I could understand as a liberal arts major, as a marketing professional, as a leadership professional. But this is what I was saying. When I was in biology class, I was told our brain stopped growing at around age 25. And that's what was believed at that point in time. But now scientists know that our brain continues to grow well into our 60s and 70s, maybe even into our 80s and 90s. There's just not enough 80-year-olds and 90-year-olds around to test. But our brain continues to grow through a process that's called neuroplasticity. So it continues to grow, continues to expand, it continues to change, and it can either change for the better or it could change for the worse, depending on our lifestyles and what we do. So the health of your brain will be a vital factor in keeping dementia and a range of brain-related diseases at bay. Yes, there is a DNA component to Alzheimer's and dementia, but it's not the only factor. And I'm not suggesting to you that you can prevent Alzheimer's and dementia. No research has shown yet that we can prevent it. There's no pill yet or medicine we can take to prevent it, but we may be able to delay it. We may be able to keep it at bay. In fact, not may. We know we can keep it at bay, or scientists know we can keep it at bay. We can delay our risk for it through certain lifestyle changes. If you fail to ensure the proper health of your brain, i.e. by not giving it enough oxygen, enough nutrients, enough vitamins, enough minerals, then it will degenerate and it will not be your best friend as you age. And it's a lifetime pursuit. It's not something you should wait until your retirement age to start thinking of it, or your pre-retirement age to start thinking about it. Brain health is a lifetime pursuit, as I'm going to share with you here. So the bad news is the brain does age to some extent. That is inevitable. And by that we mean that our brain mass will reduce, our cortical density will thin, our white matter will shrink, and that slows our processing and our cognitive functions. And our neurotransmitter systems, they generate less chemical messengers, and that's why sometimes we'll forget where we placed our keys or where our glasses are when they're on top of our head, or all these little things that we jokingly call senior moments. So it will, but at the speed at which it ages, now this is what we can have an impact on. And one of the key factors is obesity in midlife, so in your 40s and 50s, accelerates brain aging by approximately 10 years. So if you take a 55-year-old person, take two 55-year-old people, similar lifestyle, similar income levels, similar living in the same area, similar background, but one is obese and the other isn't. The one that is obese or has too much body fat, their brain will tend to resemble that of a 65-year-old person, roughly. So we're not doing our brain any favors carrying excess weight on our bodies. Sugar, soft drinks, and even diet sodas are all connected with speeding up this brain aging. And they're all now been connected scientifically with smaller overall brain volume, in other words, smaller brains, poor episodic memory, and a shrunken hippocampus. Additionally, lack of regular mental stimulation contributes to retirement-related cognitive decline. So, binging on Netflix is not mental stimulation. And we already talked about 60% of Americans will develop a brain disease. And so one of my other key messages to you right now is that the aging brain is a lifestyle choice. We all get to make that choice to how fast our brain ages. We talked about accelerating. We've talked about this. I'm just sort of wrapping up a few things here. Again, I know people go in and out of these presentations a little bit. The third point here, high levels of abdominal fat in old age is directly correlated with the reduction in cognitive function. So the old age here was defined as 60 plus. I know a few of us on this call would argue that 60 plus is not old age, but this is the research that was done. So excess or high levels of abdominal fat in old age correlated with reduction in our cognitive functionalities. And this, I wish I'd known this years ago, men who packed on the most abdominal fat by their 40s are the most likely to develop dementia later in their lives if they don't get that abdominal fat off. And I walk the talk here, guys. I put on abdominal fat in my 40s and 50s. When I did this research a few years ago, it's now been almost 2 years now. I lost 20 pounds in the first 6 months. I've lost 10 pounds in, so I'm 30 pounds lighter than I was 2 years ago, and I'm keeping it off. And I understand the importance of this. And the reason for this is that fat cells cause inflammation, as we know, and that's the inflammation in our abdominal region, but it also causes inflammation in our brains. And if our cells are inflamed, then this in our brains, this is reducing the flow of oxygen and reducing the flow of blood to our brains, and therefore increasing our risk for dementia and Alzheimer's. So what do? Well, now's the good news. I want to finish on the good news here. So it is a lifetime pursuit. Unhealthy habits on our young adult years in our middle life makes us prime candidates for dementia in our 60s and 70s. Things like junk food, fast food, obesity, excessive sedentary time. In fact, the research from UCLA shows that more people sit throughout the day at work or at home is directly correlated to thinning of certain regions of the brain. So the worst thing you can do, back when we all go, or some of us go back to working in the environment and working in meetings, and even now being on Zoom calls all day long, the worst thing you can do is sit down, watch TV, and not get up and take a 20-minute walk. Lack of physical exercise, sitting too long in meetings, where all these things lead to increased risk for dementia. So it's never too late to start on a path to our healthy brains, but we need to get started on it. Talked about all that. Oh, fatigue also disrupts the speed at which the brain cells communicate. Here's interesting information that I read, and it's in the book, is that when we've been awake for 17 hours and our brain starts to get tired, 17 hours in a row, our brain typically will be operating as if we have a blood alcohol content of 0.05. So in Australia and Europe, 0.05 is actually the legal limit for drinking. So if you're over 0.05 in actual blood alcohol content, you would be drunk driving in Europe and in Australia. Here in the United States, it's 0.08. But your brain is operating as if it's 0.05, and that's without alcohol. So it's assuming, if you have a drink in an adult beverage after being awake for 15 or 16 hours, your brain's even going to be operating at a lower rate. In fact, when you've been awake for 24 hours in a row, so people doing double shifts or not able to sleep or whatever, your brain is effectively operating as if you have a blood alcohol content of 0.10, which is legally, or is illegal to drink anywhere in the world. Sorry, illegal to drive anywhere in the world. So this is why here in the United States, being tired, sleep driving is one of the leading causes of automobile deaths. Because the brain can't function. And this shocked me because I used to live in Singapore, and I used to, particularly when I first moved to Singapore, for a few years I was there, I used to fly back to the United States on a regular basis. And I can't sleep on planes. I'd be awake for 25, 28, 29 hours. I'd land somewhere, I'd get a rental car, maybe drive 2 hours to wherever I needed to get to. By the time I got there, I'd been awake 35, 36, 37 hours. I don't do that anymore. It scared the heck out of me when I read this research. So don't let you have people working double shifts, long work hours. Don't let them drive after double shifts. Put them in an Uber, just whatever you need to do to protect the welfare of your employees. Our risk dementia factors are not surprising. This comes from the University of Bordeaux, which studied 6,000 participants over age 65. Smoking, having a body mass index over 25, not exercising, not eating fish a couple times a week, not eating fruit or vegetables 3 times a week, high blood pressure, hypertension, high blood cholesterol, high blood sugar, all the typical things you would expect. Now the good news. Healthy lifestyle changes can have far-reaching effects on long-term brain health, including your ability to cope with these diseases and to slow down your age-related decline. Research shows that people who experience the least decline in our cognitive functions and memory all share the same characteristics, and it's just the opposite of the previous slide. They do partake in physical activity. They pursue intellectually stimulating activities. They stay socially active. They manage stress. They eat healthy. They sleep well. All those factors are interrelated. There's no magic number one factor to pursue. I'll go back. You can't just say, okay, I'll be more socially active. I'll just do that, or I'll just manage my stress. No, they're all interrelated. Unfortunately, again, the excess weight is a negative factor for each of those characteristics. As you can imagine, if you are excess weight, you don't want to exercise, you're too tired, you probably would rather watch TV than, have good stimulating activities like playing chess or Scrabble or something like that. You may not be as socially active. You probably don't manage your stress levels very high. You don't eat well, and you probably don't sleep well as either. So again, excess weight is a negative factor for all the positive things you could be doing. I talked earlier about feeding your brain instead of your stomach. Research shows that the Mediterranean style eating lowers the risk for dementia by 30 to 35%. There's a lady in Chicago a few years ago who combined the Mediterranean diet with the old DASH diet. And a lot of you may know that, the DASH diet to prevent or slow down hypertension. By combining this, her early studies show a 35% reduction in risk for developing Alzheimer's. Now, this is very early information. It hasn't been tested by others. This is just some early results that she's showing. And another interesting thing, again, I'm not a scientist. I'm just going to share this with you. Obviously, all this stuff you should discuss with your medical professional first. But high-fat diets like the keto diet, it may impair, and the key word here is may, it may impact the brain's ability to detect the hormone leptin, because leptin signals us when to stop eating. So just a caution there, just something I read I want to share with you. Again, I'm not an expert on diets. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a doctor. These are the kind of things that you should be discussing, however, with your physician. If you have a nutritionist or somebody that you discuss these things with, or a health coach, these are things you should be discussing with them. The really good news is that lifestyle changes do work. If your systolic blood pressure below 120, that's not the top number. Getting that below 120 results in one study, government workers of reduction of 19% in new cases of mild cognitive impairment, what's known as MCI, and a 15% reduction in the people having both MCI and dementia. When you're stressed, when you can't think of a good idea, go outside. Walking and thinking outdoors can lead to a 75% uptick in creative ideation, or just thinking better ideas. Get some sun. You know, the little bit of sunshine helps the pineal adrenal gland to secrete the happy hormones in your body that will get you thinking better. Whereas darkness, if you're in a dark area, that leads the pineal gland to secrete melatonin, which is, you know, what people take to help them sleep. And that's why your brain can't really think if you're working particularly in very dark environments with no windows, and you don't get outside. If you're stuck indoors all day with no chance to see sunlight, go outside and get some fresh air, it's harder to have that creative ideation going on. 20 to 30 minutes a daily aerobic exercise. That's all we're talking about. You don't need to run marathons or half marathons. 20, 30 minutes improves overall cognitive function. And for people who exercise roughly 40 minutes, 3 times a week, they showed significant cognitive advantages compared to those who don't. So if you double that, but only do it 3 times a week, but do it for longer periods, they can help, again, it just helps pump blood and oxygen into your brain. Quality sleep also resets the buildup of synaptic connectivity. So it's important to get good quality sleep at night. How much is up to each individual. What doesn't work, these brain training games and apps that you see advertised on the internet or late night television, pseudo medicine pills and supplements, nothing has been proven to, you know, that increases your brain ability. I know there's a lot of stuff advertised out there, herbal supplements and other stuff. There's been no scientific study to show things that actually work. So your 7 steps, quite frankly, are very simple. Manage your blood pressure, control your cholesterol, keep your blood sugar normal, be physically active, eat a healthy diet, lose extra weight, and quit smoking, or better yet, never start. Not surprisingly, these are also the 7 steps that help heart disease and stroke. And obviously, because heart disease and stroke is, again, related to how well your blood is pumping, and same as how well your blood is pumping to your brain. Some general guidelines, but again, check with your physician what works best for you. We're all different. We all have different lifestyles. You know, for instance, particularly BMI under 25. The second point there really depends on your muscular, your skeletal, and what you're comfortable with. But if you keep your BP below 135 over 85 is the current health guidelines. As I mentioned earlier, aerobic activity, 20 to 25 minutes, 4 times a week. A little bit of strength exercise as well. Having a healthy diet, and most importantly, get that annual physical checkup, get your blood work done, monitor that, and talk to your doctor about what you should be doing. All right. There's an old Irish proverb that says, no time for your health today, then no health for your time tomorrow. So if you don't take focus on your health today, you won't be healthy in the future. I've revised that and say no time for your brain health today, then there's no brain health for your time tomorrow, and your latter years will not be as enjoyable and as fruitful as they could be. It's an old Chinese proverb that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So once again, I'll tell you the best time to start planning your long-term brain health is in your 30s and 40s. And if you've gone past your 30s and 40s, the second best time is now. Start doing it now. It's never too late to start on a path to healthy brain health. This is going to be a huge societal issue. As you saw earlier, even pre-pandemic, we were talking about 10 million Americans suffering from Alzheimer's by the end of this decade. And 60% of all American adults having some form of brain health. And that's if we don't change things. Again, that was pre-pandemic. It's only going to get worse. So let me finish. I'll open up to questions in a moment because I think it'll be easier to turn with Zoom rather than going back and forth. But everything I share with you today is in my book. I'm very proud of it. It's won a couple awards from the Nonfiction Authors Association and the Independent Press. These are my contact details. I'm sure Lori or somebody will give them to you if you'd like to contact me, talk offline. I'm also on LinkedIn as everyone else is, but just feel free to reach out to me. And I have a little gift for you for thank you for being participants today. I've got a book called Great Leadership Words of Wisdom. It has 10,000 quotes on great leadership from global business leaders, statesmen, athletes, coaches, sages, and philosophers. If you go to this website, https:// leadership-quotes.com, .com, not qualm. Been talking too long here. Leadership-quotes.com. Put in your email address. You'll get a link to sent to you to download a free PDF version of this book. So if you like quotes, there are great quotes in there on all kinds of topics around leadership. So with that, I want to say thank you. And Lynn, it's over to you whether you want to do a couple questions now or whether you want to have the break.
Do a couple. I know that I've seen. Actually, I saw a great reduction in multitasking over in the Gather.town as you started talking about it. So that was fabulous that that someone was listening there. But I have two questions. Let's try and gather those, right? And then what I'm going to say to folks is we're going to move to Gather.town. If you haven't been there, you'll find it. Stephen may find his way over there, or he may choose to stay here on Zoom and answer some questions in between. It's really, I don't know, we'll ask him after. But let me take these two questions that came in while you were talking. One, can you kind of speak to the difference between the time you spend researching a decision versus the time you spend making the decision? Or is that all in the same thing?
No, it's different, I think, and that's what that professor from Stanford University said. I said one of the mistakes, particularly big decisions, that we can get stuck in the researching mode too long, and we spend more time researching it. One of the things I often talk to people, people often say, I need to gather enough information, and I often say, make sure you're gathering the relevant information. We can get lost in data. We can get too much information and not understand really what's relevant to the decision, and particularly in the workplace. Is to understand if you're not the decision maker. Let's say you are the person recommending a course of action to a boss or a committee, really to understand how they're going to make that decision. What data do they need? Which they may make it based on different decisions. For instance, you at your level of the organization, you may be thinking 2 to 3 years out. And you may be thinking, we want to launch a product and we want to be profitable within 8 months or so. But the people above you at the committee level or senior management, they may say, you know what, we're fine. We don't need to make profit on this for the first year. We want to create a product and we want to dominate the market. And yeah, we'll get the low hanging fruit. We want to get it out there. We want to revise it and do it better. And we've got a 5-year horizon. Different criteria for making that decision. So I think one of our other speakers is going to talk a little bit more about that too, Lynn, today, about decision making, the process for decision making.
Great. Okay, so now this is one that I think is going to speak to everybody, right? So I think many of us listened as actively as we could to your discussion around multitasking. And all of us might want to think that we're the 1 or 2% that really are multitasking.
Of course we do.
Because we're all above average, right? We're all there. So tell us what your thoughts are, though, when there's this random multitasking. I'm sure, I'm not going to admit what I was doing while you were talking, but it wasn't completely listening, right?
Yeah, of course.
So how does one communicate effectively in this environment with all this multitasking going on?
I suggest first set people's expectations, and look, I understand we're in a 24/7 environment. People are constantly looking to us for information on this. But here's some things I do. But for instance, I even started this well before I learned about mindfulness and leadership. But back when I was at Citibank and I was a vice president of market, I had 23 people reporting me. I basically at one point I got tired of being interrupted, and I didn't realize it was impacting my decision making. I just got tired of it. So told my staff on Tuesday mornings from 10 o'clock to noon, unless the building's on fire, if you see my door closed, I am not to be interrupted. Full stop. And on Thursdays, I think it was like 2:30 to 4 o'clock or something like that. Same thing. If I've got my door, I am working on strategic planning. I might be working on annual personal performance reviews. Whatever I'm doing, I cannot be interrupted unless it's critical. And then I had to stick to it. So, so I think the second day of this, one of my people came in and said, "Hey, boss, I need you to look at this ad where, I got to look at sign off on this proof and tell the agency to send it." I said, "You know what? Come back to me in 45 minutes. Go." I had to force that. No, the agency needs to know now. I said, "No, they don't. They can wait 45 minutes. Suppose I was on an airplane right now. You couldn't reach me. What would you do?" "Well, I'd wait for you to land." "Okay, pretend I'm on an airplane. I haven't been sitting in my office, but pretend I'm on an airplane." And so you set people's expectations. And look, you can't do it 8 hours a day, every day. Set times when you're not available, when you do need to focus, you do need to concentrate. Same thing, I suggest that in your family lives. Your children need to be doing distance learning. You shouldn't be interrupting them. If asking them about, hey, reminding them, hey, you forgot to put the trash cans out, or I got to go do this for you. I know how we're all parents. We all have gone through this. Your kids are doing homework. Let them focus on the homework. You can always talk to them later about not taking the trash cans out to the street, or not emptying the dishwasher, or whatever task they didn't do, or about tomorrow's schedule. Let them learn to focus as well. I hope that helps.
That's great. Okay, so Stephen, are you going to hang around here in Zoom, or do you want to go over to GatherTown? How's your?
Let me hang here for 10 minutes. I know some people don't like answering questions in front of the group, and I'm not familiar enough with GatherTown. I tried it earlier this morning. I had one conversation with one person, but let's see. I just want to thank. I see people: Adriana Fuentes, Ralph Oliva, Dr. Oliva. Good to see you again. Ralph and I worked together. We won't tell you how long ago, but we were working together many years ago. So I see a few. Right. Thank you for your comments, everybody. Appreciate it. So I'll stay here, and then I'll go over there and say 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. So what I will invite everyone to do until about 12:55, right? So